This week's Knesset preliminaries to apply Israeli law to parts of the West Bank triggered unusually blunt US pushback, which I covered. President Trump told Time that if annexation went ahead, Israel would lose all of its support from the United States, and then publicly waved the issue away as something Israel is not going to do, signaling a hard red line tied to his Gaza ceasefire architecture. Vice President J.D. Vance, the gerbil, on the ground in Israel, called the vote a very stupid political stunt and an insult, while insisting the West Bank will not be annexed under current US policy. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, warned annexation would endanger Trump's Gaza plan, repeating that message in press gaggles and Israeli media hits. The result, Netanyahu ordered his coalition not to advance annexation bills for now, framing the initial votes as an opposition provocation during Vance's visit. On the surface, US leverage has therefore paused legislative momentum in Israel, but pausing a bill is not the same as neutralizing a movement. And the problem with this movement is that the modern media doesn't understand or respect the religious underpinnings of this movement. So I thought I would spend a little bit of time, so quite a long video, explaining the Hasidic and the Haredi religious background to this problem. Because there's a long religious current that treats the land not as the land of Israel, not as Eretz Yisrael, not as a negotiable asset, but as a sacred trust. It's got biblical and rabbinic backing, the covenantal promises to Abraham and his seed, and the idea that the land is mine from Leviticus 25:23 underwrite the claim for the rabbis, and particularly for the Haredi, that Israel is an inheritance from God, not a portfolio to trade. Now, Chabad, that's Lubavitch, Chabad literature repeatedly cites these verses to argue against concessions. I know Lubavitch well. I spent 2 years living in the Lubavitch community. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's position, that's Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who's now died, consistently rejected territorial concessions. He said, in the eyes, he said in a paper called Eyes Upon the Land, he links the retention of all parts of Eretz Yisrael to both religious duty and security prudence, and explicitly warns that no authority has the right to give away the people's inheritance. And Hasidic and Haredi rabbinic voices that have validated this settlement are people like Rabbi Dov Lior, the longtime chief rabbi of Kiryat Arba in the West Bank. He's issued rulings against evacuation and has been a leading halakhic pole for Judea and Samarian residents. Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, the Chabad-rooted Kabbalist linked to Yitzchak, who opposes the removal of the West Bank settlements and encourages resistance to evacuations. It's a mystical nationalist current with real on-the-ground disciples. What this means is for significant segments of the settler public, presence in Judea and Samaria, for example, the Yitzchak group, presence in Judea and Samaria is a mitzvah, a commandment anchored in covenant, not merely ideology, and certainly not political expedience. The conviction is thicker than coalition arithmetic, than the maths of the Knesset, and more durable than a US administration's timetable. And that's where the problem occurs. The problem is in allowing the more outreaching Hasidic sects to become the settlers, and that is where the problem lies. The Haredi in Jerusalem, in Mea Shearim, this is a different context. The Chabad, who are more outreaching and outgoing, I think the problem lies with Chabad, not with the Mea Shearim inhabitants. So the Haredi corridor is no longer peripheral. So the religious demography locks in the staying power into the settler community. Beitar Illit and Modi'in Illit are among the largest settlements, both strongly Haredi with sizable Hasidic populations. Their growth is driven by family size and community infrastructure rather than classic national religious activism. By 2017, observers already counted roughly 30% of West Bank settlers as ultra-Orthodox, a share that has likely risen given differential fertility. This shifts the sociological base of the enterprise from hilltop activism to everyday Haredi urbanism. And the policy lever implication here is that even if ideological outposts are frozen, large Haredi cities with schools, mikvot, and jobs have the inertia of ordinary life. These are not bargaining chips. So the problem is that theological anatomy, the core claim, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, belongs to the Jewish people by divine grant. One generation cannot alienate, cannot give away what belongs to all future generations or all past generations. Concession is not only imprudent, but is a categoric error. And the problem here is this publish and preach link. The Rebbe's talks, the letters, the widely circulated text, Eyes Upon the Land, the materials developed that have become a vocabulary that has migrated beyond Chabad circles into the broader religious common speak of settler ideology. And there are adjacent currents. The Cookist religious Zionism becomes national redemption with Halakha. The Ginsburg line fuses Kabbalistic language to territorial maximalism. Lior offers hard halakhic rulings for residents and soldiers. Together, they sustain a religious scaffolding that outlasts cabinets. Some Orthodox decision makers have allowed land for life arrangements under the doctrine of pikuach nefesh, and that view exists, but has been politically outmuscled by today's settler networks. So has politics forced any retreats at all? How did the settlers respond? Well, yes, there is a record of enforced evacuations and a record of backlash and adaptation. In Sinai, 1982, Yamit, Israel dismantled the Sinai settlements under the Egypt Treaty. Evacuation day saw clashes and dramatic scenes, but the state prevailed, and the episode remains a martyr myth for parts of the settler movement. The Gaza disengagement in 2005, the Gush Katif and northern Samaria settlements, 21 Gaza settlements and 4 in the northern West Bank were evacuated. There were sit-ins, synagogue barricades, mass mobilizations. The state removed residents with force where required. The trauma seeded a generation of outpost activism and refusal movements. The Amona outpost in 2006 and the final clearance by 2017, repeated court rulings culminating in removals that produced some of the worst settler-state clashes in the West Bank. The counter-trend since 2023, the partial undoing of northern West Bank disengagement with legal steps enabling the return to Chomesh and permissions for Sa-Nur, Ghanim and Kadim. This illustrates how defeats can be reversed when political winds shift. And the evacuation is possible, but it's politically explosive for the Knesset. It radicalizes religious fringes, births new outposts, and reappears later as a cause to be legally or administratively clawed back. So the Trump-Vance-Rubio pressure will bite less than Washington hopes. In the short run, it freezes bills. In the long run, it cannot uproot a claim that is religious, covenantal, that is domesticated inside growing Haredi cities. The residents are not primarily there to make a point to Washington. They are there because their rabbis, their family schools and housing ladders are there, and the most determined ideological nodes, Yitzcha, the Yitzcha movement and its satellites, are animated by teachings that treat hilltops as holy altars, not bargaining positions. Policy making that ignores this thicker motivation keeps misjudging compliance. And even when the state compels withdrawals, the movement's repertoire includes legal attrition, hilltop relaunches, and the slow re-entry through courts and ministries. The recent legal return to evacuated sites shows how gains can be re-won over time. The southern belt, Hebron and Gush Etzion, Kiryat Arba, and the Hebron Jewish quarter orbit of Ma'arat HaMachpelach, under rabbis like Dov Lior, and nearby Beitar Illit, anchors a vast Haredi grid with multiple Hasidic courts. This is theology in action, ancestral graves plus family city growth. The central spine from Jerusalem up to Shiloh, Modi'in Illit and the Shiloh block mix Haredi urbanism with yeshiva-driven nationalism. The living near sites tied to the Ark and to early Israelite worship. It's very difficult to move away from that historical and religious bedrock. In the northern hills in Samaria, you've got the Yitzchak movement, Itamar, Elon, Moreh, Har Bracha, the most ideologically charged terrain with Ginsburg's influence and repeated friction. Mystical settlement that awakens the hills and reminds people of the great Kabbalistic centres in the north of Israel, in what was once Nazareth. And contrast the sealing power of US diplomacy with the floor power of religious demography. The ceiling can block a law today, the floor determines who's there tomorrow. And the Yamit to Gush Katif arc shows that coercive withdrawals are achievable but boomerang politically, often regenerating the project later in different legal dress. Any durable settlement policy must engage with the religious grammar of land that Lubavitch and allied rabbis have supplied for half a century, rather than assuming it's a switch that Washington can flick on or flick off by applying pressure to the Israeli government, to the Knesset. And I'm afraid at the moment, looking at the articles that are coming out of Washington, and that deal with this issue, they are completely ignoring this religious aspect. The religious aspect will determine what happens, not the political aspect. So in order to stop the settlement movement, somebody has to deal with the religious motivation. That is the only way to stop it. And at the moment that isn't advanced and that isn't promoted. And the other possibility is to find a way to integrate those religious settlements into a Palestinian landmass. That would be harder to achieve, but not impossible. The important thing is to remember this is not politically driven primarily, it's religiously driven. And it's not driven by people who are instinctively belligerent. It's driven by people who could be persuaded, particularly when co-opted by the rabbinic leaders, by the respective rebbes. It could well be a peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians, but the people to be talking to are not in the Knesset. The people to be talking to are in the yeshivot, are in the are the heads of the religious communities, particularly the acting heads of Lubavitch and the acting heads of the fringe movements that have congregated around the Lubavitch ideology, or have taken on the Lubavitch ideology among the Haredi communities.